The night had dressed itself in splendor, as if beauty alone could drown out cruelty. Chandeliers spilled molten light over the ballroom, each crystal trembling with music and laughter, while silk skirts whispered secrets across the polished floor. Yet amid this orchestration of elegance stood a young woman learning, with painful clarity, how swiftly admiration curdled into amusement. Miss Eleanor Hartwell, once welcomed with polite curiosity, now felt every gaze glance past her, or worse, linger with a hunger sharpened by rumor. Only weeks earlier, her name had been spoken with promise. A courtship, loudly admired, had been paraded before society as suitable and advantageous. The gentleman in question possessed manners, a title by marriage, and a smile that never reached his eyes. It was he who had asked for her hand in half-earnest tones, and he who had ensured the request was overheard. Tonight, his absence spoke louder than any declaration. In its place hovered the quiet understanding that Eleanor had been misjudged, or perhaps worse, used. Whispers fluttered like moths toward candle flame. She caught fragments as one catches cold air through a crack in a window. Reckless, some said. Ambitious, murmured others. There were even kinder voices that pitied her, and pity, Eleanor knew, was the most permanent mark of all. She held herself straight, gloved hands folded with care, performing dignity as though it were a role learned too late. Every measured breath was an act of resistance against the heat creeping into her cheeks. Her gown, pale and modest by design, seemed suddenly transparent to judgment. She wondered if her mother, long buried and spared this sight, would have advised silence or retreat. Instead, Eleanor remained, because retreat would confirm what society already suspected, that she had misstepped, and now paid the price. The orchestra swelled, couples took their places, and still no one approached her. Isolation, she discovered, could exist even in a room built for closeness. Across the ballroom, unseen by her, stood the Duke of Ravensmere. He was a man accustomed to observation, to weighing silence against speech. His dark coat cut a severe line against the brightness surrounding him, and his expression revealed little. Ravensmere had arrived without intention of lingering, yet something in the arrangement of the room arrested him. He noticed how Eleanor did not fidget, how her chin remained lifted despite the murmurs tightening around her like a net. He knew, as all did, of the failed courtship. He had also discerned, with a clarity sharpened by distance, the cruelty of its execution. The gentleman's absence, the laughter that followed, the way society sharpened its knives only after blood was drawn. Ravensmere felt an unfamiliar tightening in his chest, not anger exactly, but a precise aversion to injustice dressed as propriety. He did not look away. The moment came without announcement. A pause in the music, a ripple of anticipation. Eleanor, bracing herself for another stretch of invisibility, felt a shadow fall across the light at her feet. She lifted her eyes and met his. The Duke inclined his head with formal gravity, as though addressing an equal, not a woman under quiet sentence. "Miss Hartwell," he said, his voice calm and unhurried, "may I request the honor of this dance?" The room stilled. Eleanor's heart struck once, hard enough to steal her breath. Acceptance would bind her to him in public memory. Refusal would brand her ungrateful, perhaps insolent. She placed her gloved hand in his, aware of every eye measuring the space between their fingers. When he led her onto the floor, conversation fractured and reformed around them, altered forever by that single, deliberate choice. As they moved, Ravensmere spoke sparingly, offering no explanation, demanding none. Eleanor felt something shift, like ground settling after a tremor. The whispers softened, replaced by uncertainty. Yet as the music carried them forward, she sensed that salvation, once given, always came at a cost. And somewhere beneath the weight of his composed presence, a question began to form that neither of them yet dared to name. When the final note faded, the Duke released her hand with the same precision with which he had taken it, as though the moment had been measured and found sufficient. Applause resumed, cautious at first, then fuller, a social instinct asserting itself. Eleanor returned to the edge of the room changed, though no mirror would confess it. She was no longer alone, she was observed anew, and that distinction altered the air around her. Gratitude pressed at her ribs, tangled with a fear she could not yet untangle. Ravensmere did not linger beside her. He inclined his head once more and withdrew into the gathering, a retreat that felt intentional, almost protective. In his absence, the whispers resumed, but their tone had shifted. Questions replaced verdicts. Motives were speculated upon, alliances imagined. Eleanor understood that he had not erased the stain. He had interrupted the story. What came next would be written by others unless she learned to hold the pen herself. She stood very still, allowing the sensation to settle. Her pulse slowed. The humiliation that had brought heat to her face cooled into something steadier, something like resolve. She wondered what debt had been incurred and whether it could ever be repaid. Somewhere within her, a tenderness stirred, unwelcome and undeniable, drawn not to his rank but to the restraint of his kindness. She did not name it. Names, she knew, gave power. From across the room, Ravensmere watched once more. He told himself he had acted from courtesy alone, that the balance of the evening required correction. Yet as he turned away, the image of her composure lingered with him, unsettling in its grace. He could not have said why the thought followed him into the night, only that it did, and that it would not be easily dismissed. In that shared silence, fate leaned closer, preparing consequences neither mercy nor rank could forever delay, or deny them entirely henceforth. In the days that followed the ball, Eleanor discovered that salvation, once witnessed, never traveled alone. It arrived bearing companions called curiosity, speculation, and envy. Doors that had closed reopened, though not without hesitation. Invitations returned, phrased with careful politeness, as if society were testing whether the Duke's favor had been temporary or declarative. Eleanor accepted sparingly, sensing that each appearance was now an examination rather than a courtesy. Ravensmere did not seek her out, yet his presence shaped her movements as surely as a shadow defines light. At assemblies, his figure was often nearby, never intrusive, never intimate. He spoke to her as one might address a respected acquaintance, measured and precise. Others noticed. They always noticed. Some women smiled too quickly at Eleanor, others avoided her entirely, fearing association with rumor. Men observed her with new interest, not romantic but strategic, as though she had become a point of negotiation. The first token arrived without ceremony. A small parcel delivered by footman, wrapped plainly, bearing no note. Inside lay a book, its leather binding worn soft by use. Eleanor recognized it immediately, a volume of poetry rarely circulated, marked with faint annotations in the margin. She touched the page where his hand had once rested and felt a warmth she quickly folded away. To keep it was innocent. To understand it was dangerous. She debated returning the gift, rehearsing words of polite refusal that would preserve distance. Yet she kept it, telling herself it was only gratitude she felt, not hope. That night, she read until candlelight failed, each line echoing sentiments she would never voice. By morning, whispers had reached her door. Someone had seen the parcel delivered. Someone had inferred meaning. Meaning, once imagined, seldom required proof. Ravensmere remained unaware. He had sent the book without consideration, believing knowledge shared to be harmless. In his mind, Eleanor was a woman wounded by circumstance, deserving of gentler treatment. He failed to notice how often his thoughts returned to her composure, her restraint. He mistook concern for habit, and habit for nothing at all. Thus, while Eleanor guarded her heart, he left his unexamined. The scandal, when it arrived, came dressed as concern. A matron's voice lowered in sympathy, warning Eleanor of perceptions. A cousin hinted that alignment with the Duke invited expectations she could not fulfill. Eleanor listened, thanked them, and returned home with her pulse racing. She understood now that protection had its price. To be seen beside Ravensmere was to be claimed by speculation, even without promise. At the next gathering, Eleanor arrived prepared for scrutiny. The room seemed narrower, the air heavier. Conversations paused when she entered, then resumed with deliberate normalcy. Ravensmere acknowledged her with a slight nod, nothing more. Yet when a gentleman approached her with insincere charm, Ravensmere intervened with quiet authority, redirecting the conversation with ease. The message was unmistakable. Eleanor was not available for entertainment. That evening, a second token appeared, this time unmistakably deliberate. A pair of gloves, pale and unadorned, accompanied by a single line in his hand, "For the season's chill." Eleanor's breath caught. Practical, restrained, and devastating. She pressed the note to her lips, then immediately scolded herself for the impulse. Such intimacy existed only in her imagining. He had offered comfort, not affection. Society did not share her restraint. The gloves became evidence, the book confirmation. A story formed, shaped by repetition. Eleanor's name was now spoken alongside his with knowing smiles. She felt both elevated and diminished, lifted by association, reduced by assumption. Her gratitude deepened into longing she could neither confess nor dismiss. Each kindness became a question she dared not ask. Ravensmere sensed the shift only when it was nearly complete. He noticed how Eleanor withdrew slightly, how her answers shortened, her eyes lowered sooner. He attributed it to fatigue, to the weight of attention he himself had inadvertently drawn. The possibility that he was its cause did not occur to him. He resolved to offer distance, believing space to be a remedy. Distance, however, only sharpened absence. The evening ended with rain, sudden and unrelenting. Carriages crowded the drive, tempers frayed. Eleanor waited beneath the portico, the world narrowed to water and shadow. Ravensmere appeared beside her, offering shelter beneath his umbrella. Their hands brushed. The contact was brief, electrifying, and instantly restrained. Neither spoke. The silence pressed closer than the rain. As he escorted her to her carriage, Eleanor realized that the scandal had already written its opening line. Whether she wished it or not, her fate now curved toward his. She stepped inside, heart unsteady, knowing that protection had become peril, and that the greatest danger lay not in gossip, but in the quiet truth she carried alone. Eleanor did not intend the meeting to become a confession. She requested the Duke's presence under the pretense of gratitude, a courtesy visit no one would question. The location was his estate's winter library, chosen for its formality and its quiet. Firelight climbed the spines of books, and rain traced thin lines along the tall windows, sealing the world outside into silence. Eleanor stood near the hearth, hands clasped, rehearsing words that felt insufficient the moment they formed. Ravensmere arrived precisely on time. He removed his gloves with deliberate calm, his expression unreadable yet attentive. "You wish to speak, Miss Hartwell," he said, not as a challenge, but an invitation. His voice carried restraint like armor. Eleanor nodded, gesturing for him to sit, though she remained standing. The imbalance unsettled her, yet she did not correct it. Power, she knew, resided in posture as much as title. "I wish to thank you," she began, then paused, realizing how small the words sounded in the room. "Your kindness has altered the course of my days." She did not look at him as she spoke, fearing her eyes would betray too much. Ravensmere inclined his head slightly, accepting the sentiment as one might accept payment for a debt already forgotten. "Courtesy requires no gratitude," he replied. "I did only what was proper." The word proper struck her with unexpected force. Eleanor turned then, meeting his gaze. "What is proper," she said softly, "has cost you more than you realize." He frowned, a brief disruption of composure. She explained the whispers, the assumptions, the way protection had transformed into possession in the public imagination. Each sentence was measured, careful not to accuse. Yet beneath her restraint lay urgency, trembling like a held breath. Ravensmere listened without interruption. When she finished, he rose, crossing the room with slow precision. "If my actions have caused you distress," he said, "I regret it deeply. That was never my intention." He spoke as a man accustomed to resolving matters with decisiveness. Eleanor felt the moment slipping toward misunderstanding. She stepped closer, close enough to sense the warmth of him, then stopped herself. Distance was still required. "It is not distress," she said. "It is consequence." The fire crackled, punctuating her words. She confessed her fear of becoming a symbol rather than a person, of being carried by rumor into a future not of her choosing. Ravensmere's jaw tightened. He had believed himself a shield. The realization that he might also be a weight unsettled him more than he wished to show. "I will withdraw," he said finally. "If absence will restore your peace, you shall have it. The offer was immediate, absolute. Eleanor's heart stuttered. She had not expected sacrifice, only understanding. The thought of his absence struck sharper than any whisper. For a moment, she nearly spoke the truth she had buried so carefully. Instead, she bowed her head, forcing composure to remain intact. "That is not what I desire," she said, the admission trembling at the edge of revelation. Ravensmere studied her, searching for clarity she could not grant. Silence stretched, thick and fragile. In it, Eleanor realized that withholding truth had become its own form of dishonesty. She lifted her eyes, resolved to speak without crossing the final boundary. "I wished only that you understand the gravity of your kindness," she continued. "It is not easily borne." Something shifted then, subtle yet irrevocable. Ravensmere saw not a grateful woman, but one balancing peril with grace. He felt, for the first time, uncertainty regarding his own detachment. "You are stronger than society credits," he said quietly. The words landed like a benediction. Eleanor felt seen, not as an object of rumor, but as herself. The recognition steadied her, even as it deepened the ache within. The rain intensified, drumming against the windows. Eleanor realized that this moment, contained and private, was the fulcrum upon which everything balanced. She had not confessed love, yet she had revealed dependence more dangerous than affection. Ravensmere returned to his seat, his composure restored, though altered. "I will endeavor," he said, "to be more mindful." The promise was sincere and insufficient. As she took her leave, Eleanor felt both lighter and more exposed. The truth she had not spoken pressed harder than before. Ravensmere watched her depart, troubled by an unfamiliar sensation, regret, not for action taken, but for understanding delayed. When the door closed, the room seemed colder. Each believed the conversation concluded, unaware it had only just begun. Eleanor paused in the corridor beyond the library, steadying herself against the carved banister. Her reflection in the glass showed composure, yet her hands trembled faintly. She understood now that restraint had not protected her heart. It had merely postponed its reckoning. With each step away from him, the unspoken confession grew louder, a presence she could neither silence nor surrender. She wondered if courage meant speaking the truth, or surviving without it. Inside, Ravensmere remained still, staring into the fire as if it might answer him. He replayed her words, hearing beneath them an urgency he had chosen not to name. The library, once a refuge, now felt charged with absence. He recognized, with unwelcome clarity, that withdrawal would not resolve what had been awakened. Distance, he sensed, would sharpen rather than soothe. That night, each lay wakeful, bound by the same unanswered question. Eleanor pressed her hand to her chest, acknowledging the depth of what she felt without granting it voice. Ravensmere, for the first time, doubted the safety of his own restraint. Somewhere between duty and desire, a line had blurred. And though neither had crossed it, both understood that the next meeting would demand more than courtesy could contain. The future hovered, unresolved, heavy with promise and peril alike, waiting for one of them to speak what had been carefully withheld, and to accept whatever consequence honesty would inevitably claim from hearts long disciplined by silence. Neither yet knew who would be brave enough first. Finally, the declaration arrived not in secrecy, but under the full, unblinking eye of society. Eleanor sensed it before she understood it, a shift in the air as unmistakable as the pause before thunder. The evening was arranged to celebrate a charitable endowment, yet every carriage, every candle, every voice seemed tuned toward anticipation rather than benevolence. She entered with measured calm, her gown subdued, her expression composed, carrying herself as one who had learned endurance through restraint. Ravensmere stood near the dais, speaking with the hosts, his posture immaculate, his face grave. He had requested her presence formally, through proper channels, offering no hint of intent. Eleanor had accepted because refusal would have been louder than attendance. Still, her pulse betrayed her as she crossed the room. She felt again the familiar weight of observation, but beneath it lay something sharper, like a held breath shared by more than one heart. When he turned and met her gaze, the room seemed to recede. He inclined his head, not with the courtesy of acquaintance, but with something closer to reverence. Eleanor's breath caught. She realized then that his composure carried strain, as though held together by resolve alone. The music softened, conversations waned, and a subtle hush spread, guided by instinct rather than command. Ravensmere spoke, his voice steady, resonant enough to carry. He thanked the assembly for their presence, acknowledged the cause, then paused. The pause was deliberate, weighted. Eleanor felt the moment pivot, history tilting toward consequence. "There are times," he continued, "when propriety demands silence. And there are times when silence becomes a form of injustice." Murmurs stirred. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. He turned toward her fully. "Miss Eleanor Hartwell," he said, naming her with intention. "You have borne rumor with dignity and cruelty with grace. It is my failure that I did not sooner recognize how my restraint may have compounded your burden." The room was utterly still. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she did not look away. His gaze held hers, unwavering. "I stand before you," he went on, "to correct that failure." He spoke then not of duty, but of choice. Not of protection, but of admiration. He confessed that her strength, her composure, her quiet courage had unsettled him, challenged him, and ultimately claimed his regard. Each word dismantled the distance he had so carefully maintained. Eleanor felt tears threaten, held back by pride and awe. He did not say love at first. He said respect. He said esteem. He said that he could no longer allow her to be spoken of as conjecture rather than truth. Finally, his voice softened, just enough to reveal what lay beneath. "I ask," he said, "for the privilege of offering my life openly alongside yours, if you will accept it." The silence that followed was not empty, but brimming. Eleanor felt the room waiting, judgment poised. In that stillness, she understood that this moment belonged not to society, but to her. She stepped forward, each movement deliberate. She felt the years of restraint behind her, the longing she had buried, the fear she had survived. She looked at him, truly, and saw not a savior, but a man who had finally seen her. "I accept," she said, her voice clear, unshaking. The simplicity of the words carried all she had withheld. A collective exhale swept the room. Ravensmere bowed his head, not in triumph, but in humility. He offered his hand, and when she placed hers within it, the gesture felt irrevocable. Applause followed, cautious at first, then sincere. Some faces reflected surprise, others approval, some calculation. Eleanor noticed none of it. She felt only the warmth of his hand, the steadiness of his presence. For the first time, she did not feel observed, but witnessed. The distinction altered everything. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the evening softened, they stood together near the tall windows. Rain had returned, tracing silver paths against the glass. Ravensmere spoke quietly, meant only for her. "I did not know," he admitted, "how close I came to losing you to my own caution." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Nor I," she replied, "how long I mistook silence for safety." They did not speak further of love. There would be time for that, she sensed, time earned through honesty rather than urgency. What mattered now was the truth made visible. Yet beneath the relief, a tremor remained. Eleanor knew that declaration altered perception, but not history. There would be consequences still, challenges unimagined. As they parted that night, her heart lifted and tightened in equal measure. From the edge of the room, a pair of eyes watched with narrowed focus, measuring opportunity in the wake of revelation. Eleanor did not see them, nor did Ravensmere. They believed the moment resolved, the conflict concluded. But as the doors closed and the rain fell harder, the future shifted again, quietly preparing its next demand. Resolution did not announce itself loudly. It settled, enduring and earned. Eleanor recognized love not as rescue, but recognition fulfilled. Ravensmere learned devotion required risk, not merely honor. Together they faced the world altered, not softened, yet unafraid. On a quiet evening, beneath lamplight and open sky, they spoke freely at last, words simple, vows unadorned. The past loosened its hold. As they turned forward, hand in hand, uncertainty remained, but no longer ruled them. What awaited would test them still, yet they would meet it united. Their story closed gently, while another, braver chapter waited ahead. Just beyond tomorrow. Yet peace invited reflection, and reflection summoned truth long deferred. Eleanor finally confessed the depth of her earlier silence, the love she had concealed while believing herself unseen. Ravensmere listened, struck by humility and remorse. He admitted his obliviousness, how honor had blinded him to yearning. The confession did not wound, it healed. Regret softened into gratitude for endurance. They understood how near they had come to loss. The realization bound them closer, a shared astonishment at fate's restraint and mercy combined, earned through patience, suffering, courage, and deliberate, difficult love they finally embraced without fear or hesitation remaining anywhere. Society adjusted, as it always does, absorbing scandal into routine. New conversations replaced old, judgments softened into precedent. Eleanor's name regained steadiness, no longer a question. Ravensmere's authority remained intact, now tempered by humanity. Together they hosted gatherings marked by sincerity rather than display. Observers noted the change, unsure why it disarmed criticism. Perhaps love, when openly born, deprived cruelty of secrecy. Eleanor moved through rooms unafraid, her posture unburdened. She had survived scrutiny and emerged whole, a rarity quietly admired. Her resilience became legacy, instructing others without deliberate instruction through example, grace, and unwavering self-respect always within memory thereafter. Ravensmere changed as well, though fewer remarked upon it. Power no longer insulated him, it connected him. He listened more, spoke less, weighed impact alongside intent. Eleanor noticed, and loved him for it. Their partnership matured into ease, affection expressed in glances, in shared pauses. Love became less a revelation than a rhythm. Even conflict, when it surfaced, met patience instead of pride. They learned that harmony was not silence, but conversation sustained by respect. Such understanding promised endurance beyond passion, beyond novelty, beyond public approval. It steadied them against future storms together, waiting unseen, unpredictable, yet survivable always ahead. On the eve of their marriage, Eleanor stood alone briefly, considering the woman she had been. Shame no longer defined her memory, courage did. She acknowledged fear without surrendering to it. Ravensmere joined her quietly, offering presence rather than reassurance. They shared a look heavy with history and promise. No words were necessary. The journey had taught them what speech could not. Together, they stepped forward, aware that love's greatest triumph lay not in rescue, but in recognition freely chosen. That understanding sealed their union more firmly than ceremony alone. It honored struggle, patience, and devotion equally earned together forever. Morning arrived subdued and silvered, as though the world itself wished to speak gently after revelation. Eleanor woke with a sense of suspension, joy tempered by vigilance. Engagement altered her name, not her memory. She dressed deliberately, aware that every future movement would be interpreted anew. Ravensmere sent no message, a restraint she understood and respected. Affection, newly acknowledged, required patience. Outside, carriages rolled, gossip stirred, and London resumed its appetite. Eleanor inhaled, steadying herself, resolved to meet consequence without flinching. Hope felt fragile, yet unmistakably present within her disciplined heart this day despite lingering uncertainty and watchful eyes everywhere. Ravensmere spent the same hours in reflection, confronting a life reshaped by decision. He understood authority, consequence, and public scrutiny, yet intimacy proved more formidable. He reviewed letters unanswered, alliances postponed, habits disrupted by one woman's presence. Choosing Eleanor publicly had been necessary. Choosing her privately would be irrevocable. He did not regret it. Still, vigilance replaced certainty. He recognized enemies emboldened by exposure, friends recalculating advantage. Power invited challenge. Love invited vulnerability. He prepared for both with equal resolve. Such balance, he suspected, would demand sacrifice beyond reputation, comfort, or inherited privilege alone and test his endurance relentlessly forthwith. Days unfolded into a delicate truce with society. Congratulations arrived wrapped in curiosity, approval braided with warning. Eleanor received them graciously, discerning tone beneath phrasing. Some praised romance, others foresaw ambition. She answered neither. Ravensmere's presence steadied her, though they met sparingly, preserving mystery against intrusion. When together, conversation remained measured, yet silence warmed. Each learned the other's restraint, discovering affection expressed through patience rather than promise. The world watched for faltering. Eleanor refused it, standing composed, dignity sharpened by choice. Her heart, once hidden, now beat openly, courageous despite lingering, persistent doubt within an unforgiving public gaze always watching. The challenge arrived unexpectedly, carried by rumor sharpened into threat. The former suitor returned, embittered, insinuating impropriety, seeking leverage through insinuation. His words circulated swiftly, testing Ravensmere's resolve and Eleanor's endurance. Summoned privately, Ravensmere confronted him with icy restraint, dismantling claims without spectacle. Authority silenced scandal. Yet Eleanor, hearing fragments, feared once more becoming collateral. She requested truth, not protection. Ravensmere answered plainly, admitting misjudgment, vowing transparency. In that exchange, partnership replaced guardianship. They stood equal, fortified by honesty. Trust deepened, binding their fates more securely than titles ever could. The danger passed, leaving courage quietly triumphant between them both. As dawn approached, anticipation replaced anxiety. The future remained unwritten, yet no longer frightening. Eleanor and Ravensmere faced it with humility and courage, bound by truth finally spoken. Their story did not promise ease, only partnership. That was enough. In choosing each other, they reclaimed dignity once threatened by silence and scandal. Love endured, not because it was flawless, but because it was seen. And so, as light rose gently, they stepped into tomorrow together, prepared to defend what had been so carefully, bravely won. Their hearts remained vigilant, hopeful, and resolute against whatever followed, with unwavering devotion enduring always.